page 12. Beyond Death, Dan Cohn-Sherbok and Christopher Lewis, 1995. Theological and Philosophical Reflections on Life After Death. 0.2 Introductory Reflections. Life Beyond Life. LIONEL Blue. I cannot very well speak about the afterlife, not because I do not believe in it, but because it is a contradiction. When I die, both time and space will die with me, so there can be no after, nor a before for that matter. And there is another problem, too. All one can ever know is life, whether this life, another sort of life, or eternal life. So death can never be experienced. But although you cannot speak of an afterlife, you can talk about a beyond life. And that is something which I, and lots of people, have come to, not through dogma or official teaching, but by experience. It is probably a good way to approach religious matters. After all, it is taste and see that the Lord is good in the Hebrew Scriptures, and by their fruits ye shall KLL0W them in the Gospels. So the proof of the pudding really is in the eating. One should not puff one's goods in religion. One should remember that honest descriptions apply to religious metaphysics as much as they do to any other goods in the supermarket. Our experiences do not prove what you might call a beyond life, but they do point to it. And if you are prepared to base your life on it, then it does not let you down. Now, what are these experiences? Well, there are a number of very general experiences which I have and lots of other people have too. The first thing is that a lot of people have out-of-the-body experiences of some type or other. For me it usually occurs not in churches or synagogues but at cocktail parties. I am holding a piece of asparagus in one hand and a glass in the other, yakety-yakketing away. And while I am doing all this, a part of me steps outside of me and from somewhere near the ceiling looks down on the whole caboodle, with pity and compassion, both for myself and everybody else. Lots of other people recognize this too. There is another experience which many people share, and that is the feeling or the intuition, or whatever you like to call it, that although the world is not a bad place, and one can enjoy it to an extent, at the same time it is not home. It comes up to me in this situation. I am dark looking, and when I went on one of my package holidays I was in the luggage checkout at Palma Airport, and some German tourists rushed up to me, thinking that I was Spanish, and started to speak to me in bad Spanish. I replied in equally bad German, and I had to tell them, Entschuldigen, aber, excuse me, but I'm only a visitor here. And it suddenly occurred to me as I said it that this does not just apply to that situation, it applies to lots of other situations in life. I do not feel that this is home. In some sense I am a stranger here, and lots of human beings feel that. Yes, it is an interesting place, yes, you strike up friendships in the departure lounge, but sooner or later your flight is called and off you go. You are a bit apprehensive about where you are going to, but at the same time this is not really the place where you belong, and if you try to feel too permanent here, it always lets you down. It is not that sort of place. So that is another experience which I think that people have. That I'm only a visitor here, I'm also a stranger here, is recognizable. Another experience is that when people go into a silent synagogue/church, place of worship, they often feel that they have stepped into a different dimension. In the stillness, they are not quite sure what is up, but they feel that they have stepped into another world. It can also be triggered by great art or music, or sometimes by love. Then you may find something interesting, that you can make that beyond world happen. You do not just have to wait for it to happen, you can make it happen. Sometimes if you give yourself to it, and you can try this yourself, then the feeling comes back. you do something which is a bit dotty and a bit altruistic, you could kick yourself. But at the same time you get a kind of glow and you feel as if you have experienced the gravity of some unseen beyond world. Let me give you another example. I am in a train, reading a book on religion, which I am thoroughly enjoying, and I really am getting a great deal of benefit from it. But there is this lady standing up, a foolish virgin who has not reserved a seat. I try to ignore her, but my book keeps on telling me you jolly well stand up for her. So finally, in a very grumpy fashion, I do, because I know that if I do not then I cannot carry on reading the book and getting the nice sensations from it. So I stand up, though part of me says you are a bloody fool, but another part of me feels that I have made that world happen. And I think lots of people also feel as if they are pulled by a kind of gravity from some unseen world, which pulls their lives out of their normal trajectory and makes them do silly things, altruistic things, all sorts of odd things. But when they do them, once again that feeling returns. You provide your own evidence, and I think the real evidence for the beyond life is not even in these experiences I have mentioned. I think the only evidence for it, convincing evidence, is the evidence you provide yourself. In other words, you have to become your evidence. You can talk glibly about the beyond life, for and against, until the cows come home, but only when you invoke it and allow it to work on you and you see what it makes of you, only then is it convincing. It is only when, as it were, things turn inside out, that you find yourself not using it, but it using you. At the beginning this beyond life is fun. It gives you little shivers down your spine, it gives color to a rather drab life, it makes you have little chats with the cosmos, it makes you feel quite somebody. And you can play about with it quite a lot. But then there comes a point when it starts answering back, when it starts making demands on you. Then you find you are in a quandary, because you either have to say get out of my life, or you have to say well, it was nothing really in the first place, in which case you have lost it, and there is a real sense of grieving and bereavement if you do. I personally could not do that. Or else you have to go along with it, at least in part, and when you do that, you realize that something which started off as a nice idea packs a very powerful punch. And that is when you start sitting back and respecting it. I think many people find that if you invoke that beyond life, that other dimension, it has a great power. For example, alcoholics, who are not officially religious, say we rely upon a power greater than ourselves to help us out of our addiction. They have found by experience that without it they cannot do anything. They do not call it God. They just say a power greater than ourselves. Well, it affects anybody who really invokes it, and does not just play around with it, anybody who cries that most basic prayer, help, because you are out of your depth, and you do find that something happens. My parents wanted me to be a doctor, but I could not because I cannot stand the sight of blood, and so I faint. Whenever I have tried to give blood, I have always fainted, and they have told me to go away because my blood is not worth the trouble it takes to get it. That is one reason why I became a rabbi, I suppose, because souls are much less messy and gory than bodies. But life has a habit of turning back and biting you, and I found myself a chaplain to hospitals, and that is becoming an increasing part of my work. Now when I start to go into hospital I am not quite sure what is going to happen. Am I going to faint because there is a lot of gore about? That is when I invoke that beyond life. It gets me through my hospital visit. I can have my attack of nausea after I come out of the hospital, I can also have a brandy when I come out, but it helps me over the style while I am there. I think lots of people have found that. I have found that beyond life has also been important in my own personal life. I was living with someone for years, and then it finished. It was on the continent. I knew it was ending, I remember going into a church and thinking, what the hell do I do now? I remember that, as if in a conversation, something was saying to me that all the loves I had in this life were reflections of the real thing, and one day, but not in this life, perhaps at the end of it, I would meet the real thing. At least, that is how it came to me. I pushed the thought aside, it seemed too sentimental to bother about. But I remember that we were trying to work out who owned what, and we got to the business of I said, you said, he said, she said, you know, all the quarrels which go on with this sort of thing, and we were just about to have a real ding-dong of a row, of the kind that happen when couples break up, when I suddenly felt as if the face I was looking at was a kind of mask, and beyond it was this beyond life. One moment the beyond life was there, and the next it was not, as if a light was being turned on and off inside my friend's face. It was a funny sensation. I burst into laughter and said, look, we can't carry on like this, let's go to the pub. As a result, we ended things pleasantly, and we still see each other. So, that beyond life has also affected my personal relationships. Sometimes this dimension has a personal face, and sometimes it has no face. At different times in one's life one adds more imagination or less imagination to it. People are aware that beyond the world of things there is another reality. You cannot deal properly with the world of things without relying upon that other reality. I think the difficulty about the beyond life is very simple, it is just not visible. But even people who just concern themselves with the world of visible things know very well that you cannot deal with the world of visible things justly or fairly or even constructively, without recourse to that invisible world. My thinking came to a head when I got my dog. I had a big, black mongrel, a cross between an Alsatian and a Labrador, who was the love of my life. Whenever I went out of the house, she used to stand on the stairs and look at me tragically. And then, when I came back into the house, she gave a startled look, once again from the stairs, bounded down, threw me over, stood on my chest and licked my face and went into paroxysms of delight. Now this happened whether I went away for 2 weeks to the continent or whether I went away for 2 or 3 minutes to get a newspaper. Finally, I went to a vet and said, look, doesn't that pooch ever learn? I mean. And he said to me, well, you have to remember, she's only an animal and, like all animals, what's real to her are the things that she sees, smells and touches, and when you go out of the world of the senses and she can't see you, touch you or smell you, then as far as she's concerned, you cease to exist. Then when you come in through the door again, suddenly you come into the world of her senses again, and so you come alive for her. And then I began to understand, because if I saw the death and resurrection of my best friend, 2 or 3 times a day, I would also have a rather rocky emotional life. That text suddenly occurred to me, for God created man a little higher than the animals and a little lower than the angels. We are animals and, like all animals, anything which we can sense, which we can touch, see, smell, as with my dog, exists as real. When something goes out of the world of our senses, it is not sensed and by very easy transition becomes nonsense. Yet, we are also a little lower than the angels, we are the first animals in the evolutionary life who can give reality to things which are outside our senses. Our hold on that reality is very, very slight. We may get to know things like God, conscience and the beyond life, but it is very easy for us to think, oh, it's just an idea, it isn't real, like the freezer, the washing up machine, the car and the mortgage. It is a great fight, on our part, to be able to take that step and, as it were, improve on our animal heritage. We are, I think, the first of the animals who ever got that far, so it is not easy. Why do people bother to invoke this other world at all, or try to become acquainted with it, become friends with it? I think it is because sooner or later the world of sensed things lets you down. It must do. Because everything that we are ever given in life sooner or later has to be given up or given away, which you can either do gracefully or with groans, grunts and passing the buck. But sooner or later the world of things does let us down, through illness, through somebody snitching somebody we love, through someone repossessing our home. And even if none of these things has happened, one day we are going to die. Then, when that world of things lets us down, we try to get new strength and we suddenly invoke that world which is not sense. If it is invoked, as I have said before, something happens. Sometimes the world of things lets one down, either dramatically and catastrophically as in a concentration camp, or, sometimes, it is only saying goodbye to everybody, and dying quietly and gently and pleasantly. But it comes to the same thing. Then one has to put one's faith in that other dimension. Now, you can give that beyond life a human face or not. Some of the greatest Christian saints, like Teresa of Avila or John of the Cross, sometimes thought of that dimension as having a human face, the face of Christ. At the same time they also felt that sometimes it did not have that face, it was beyond that face. And I think that is a matter of temperament, environment and imagination, the clothes that you dress it in. But the reality of it is well attested. It even works on a very practical level. You are wanting to go on holiday and you are looking at the holiday brochure and you check up, balcony? Yes, sea view? Yes, bath facilities? 3-course meals twice a day? And that is fine. But then you know very well you can have all these things and it still does not add up to what you want. I, for example, have had holidays in first-class hotels and in gratia boarding houses. I have been both happy and unhappy in first-class hotels and also in gratia boarding houses. I have to admit I would far prefer to be unhappy in a first-class hotel than a gratia boarding house. You see, the world of things deals with the comfort problem, but the happiness problem is something else, and that is something which comes from that beyond life. It means peace with oneself, and coming to terms with one's anger. Comfort and happiness are not the same. And for happiness you have to deal with that beyond life. Even agnostics and atheists have learned this. Marcus Aurelius, who was no friend to Christians, says that if God exists, then you might follow him, but if he doesn't, be like a god yourself. He says that we should, as it were, construct a temple inside ourselves and go into that. That is fair enough. Whether you contemplate the absolute, have a love affair with Jesus, listen to the voice in the burning bush, it is the same kind of thing. People know, just from the business of going on holiday, that the problems of this world cannot be solved in its own terms. You have to invoke another dimension, for even this world to work. Otherwise you end up very disappointed and very annoyed. Also, in practice, it's not easy defining where you end and other people begin, or where the living end and the dead begin. If you wish, you can make room inside your mind for someone whom you want to continue living in it. All sorts of people can inhabit your mind if you are prepared to give them house room. I find that, when I think of my own personality, it is not just tricks of speech that have been adopted from other people, odd expressions, but occasionally when I come to a situation, I know I can't do this. Why? Because, say, a girl I knew who has died but says, "Lionel, how can you possibly?" And I know I cannot. I think also that religious people incarnate what they worship. So you can see Jesus or the risen Christ, as it were, in the Christians who are devoted to him. That is, I think, the way that most people perceive somebody else's God. This sharp division as to where one person ends and somebody else begins is not quite there, Lately, this business of the near-death experiences has come up. I do not know what to make of them, these circles of light and meeting people one knew. But one would also have to remember that one would have to meet the people one did not like, as well as the ones that one did. It might all be because of the lack of oxygen to the brain. Who can say? Most people I have met, who have died puzzled because life is such an unfinished business, and most people seem to die with the questions why me? Why now? At the same time, I have also noticed that when people accept that they are dying, a change happens. The problem comes in letting go. But once you have let go, people often give up their sleeping tablets and painkillers. Any nurse or doctor can tell you that. Once you look at where you are going to rather than where you have come from, then it is as if something in you relaxes and loosens up. Quite often you find, for example, at a deathbed that the dying person is really having to cope with and, in an odd sort of way, comfort the people around him or her, not vice versa. A rabbinic story has helped me. There is a strange text which says the day of one's death is better than the day of one's birth. The rabbis asked how could this be? And they said, at a birth, as the baby is born, everybody there thinks it is a wonderful thing, a matter of rejoicing. Everybody except one, the baby. The baby, which comes from the security of its another's womb, to the cold world outside, has not experienced it as a birth. It has experienced it as a death. When we come to our death, it is the same situation but in reverse. The mourners see the world that the dead person is leaving and see it as a death, but the person who is dying may well be seeing the world he or she is going into and may experience it as a birth. Once again, the difference is your point of view. I used to go to dying people in hospitals, in cancer wards, or in AIDS wards, thinking I must do it but it is going to be dreadful. The strange thing is that it is not dreadful. It is rather the opposite. I am not the only person who has felt this, because I have discussed it with other chaplains. Many of us feel that it is in these wards that we get our spirituality, that people seem to rise to the occasion of their death. It is as if part of them has already joined that beyond life and a kind of peace comes from them. Also, the fact of death and dying, in a ward, does not bring on the horrors. On the contrary, it usually brings out a great deal of affection and love, and kindness. It was after coming from an AIDS ward that I suddenly realized that heaven is a place where people love each other, and hell is a place where they do not. This AIDS ward was the closest to heaven I had ever known. There was a great deal of hugging and cuddling. They really were helping each other and I came away feeling elated. I find that I need my own input of spiritual experience. If you are a professionally religious person, earning your living by it, you cannot just keep on giving. You need to get something. Where do you get it from? I get it from people in trouble. I get it from alcoholics, from dying people and from AIDS sufferers. These are the people who give me my spirituality. When I do retreats with them, their retreats start off where other kinds of retreats end, and we deal with the nitty-gritty straight away. For them the beyond life is not an idea, is not something they can debate. The whole of the material world is no longer substantial enough to lean on, therefore every resource has to come from that beyond life, from that world which is not sense. Therefore the most unlikely people are forced to invoke it, or come to terms with it. When they do, an enormous flowering takes place, and although I am supposed to take the retreats, in fact I get more out of them than I give. That is not banality or politeness, it is the truth. Many other people who do this work have experienced exactly the same sort of thing. When you are out of your depth and the ground seems to go away from under you, that is the time when you cry help. You cannot get a sure footing on this life anymore, so you call on that beyond life in desperation, to help you, and the fact is that if you really do it with all your being, it supports you. This is why, although I cannot talk about the afterlife, I can talk about the beyond life. I cannot prove it, and it is not even good to, because all of us are secret materialists, who would love the things of the spirit to become material. This is why we would like holy statues to wink or to dance, and would like extraordinary miracles to take place. We would like to materialize the spirit, because we are materialistic. I cannot say I believe in the beyond life. What I would say is that if you base your life on the beyond life and its existence and invoke it, it just does not let you down. Page 23.